All right, so next we're moving on to Japan. And the very earliest inhabitants of Japan made their way to Japan over these ice land bridges about 200,000 years ago or so, similar to the Bering Strait. And these native peoples made their way into Japan. And then when the global temperature rose and those ice land bridges melted, they were kind of isolated in Japan. Later, Japanese people related to the Koreans migrate from the Korean peninsula over to Japan. And they push the native peoples, the Ainu peoples, further north. And they kind of dominated Japan. And the importance of this Japanese migration is that these migrants brought with them rice cultivation, they brought with them copper, they also brought with them horses as well. And we're also going to see the rise of Shinto. Shinto is the native religion of Japan. And Shinto practices things like a veneration of ancestors. And they also believe in many nature spirits called kami. And so during this period, there really wasn't any kind of centralized government, but instead they were divided into many different clans. There were 12 or so of these major clans that dominated most of Japan. So following this period, we enter the Nara and Heian period in Japan. And during the Nara and Heian period, this is when China kind of had their biggest influence on Japan. And the Nara period was highly inspired by the Tang Dynasty. And they kind of copied a lot of the Tang Dynasty in China. In fact, they're going to model their imperial court after the Tang Dynasty. They built a new capital at Nara that was basically modeled after the Chinese capital at Chang'an. And it's also during this period that we're going to see the Taika reforms implemented. And these were reforms directly modeled after China. And they're going to create an equal field system similar to what China was using to help break up the land holdings that were dominated by the upper aristocracy. They created Chinese-style government and administration system. Confucianism is going to make its way to Japan as well. And they really wanted to create a highly centralized government with similar principles to the Mandate of Heaven that China had, but ultimately a lot of that was resisted by the upper aristocracy. And following this Nara period, we're going to see the beginning of the Heian period. And the Heian period begins when they build a new capital at Heian, which is modern-day Kyoto. And the whole reason for moving the capital was Buddhist monks were becoming too powerful. And so they felt they needed a new start, a fresh start. And so they build this new capital away from the growing power of these Buddhist monks. And under this Heian period, the Japanese emperors basically become figureheads. They were basically symbols of authority without any real power. And the real power lay with these regents who kind of ruled behind the throne. And so the leader of the Fujiwara family is going to serve as regents, but they're the ones who really dominate during this Heian period. And so while these regents kind of made the major decisions for Japan, the emperor got to live this life of luxury and lived in the court. And throughout Japan's history, for most of it, the emperor never has a great deal of power. He's mostly just a figurehead. And so under this period, we're going to see the rise of an elaborate bureaucracy. We see these strict codes on moral behavior develop. We see Chinese learning begin to spread. Chinese education system spreads as well. They're going to copy Chinese script. Now they adapt it. They take Chinese script and adapt it to better fit with the Japanese language, and actually makes it a little easier for the Japanese people to learn. And because of that, we're going to see this kind of explosion of Japanese literature. And one of the best examples of this is the Tale of Genji. Tale of Genji was written by Lady Murasaki, and it captures the life of one of these Japanese princes. And it does a great job of really capturing the extravagant lifestyle of the Heian court. And so when we look at the decline of this Heian period, first off, the equal field system begins to deteriorate, just like it did over in the Tang Dynasty in China. And as that happened, more and more of these aristocratic clans began to accumulate more and more land. They begin to go to war with each other. The Bushi, these warrior leaders, kind of build up their own power bases. And we have these rival aristocratic clans feuding with each other. And so two of these powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto clan, are going to go to war against each other. And this is basically kind of like a semi-civil war in Japan. And ultimately, the Minamoto clan is going to win. And this is going to usher in our medieval period in Japanese history. And so the leader of that power struggle, again, was the Minamoto clan. And the Minamoto leader is going to take the title of shogun. And so the emperor was still there, but he stayed in Heian or Kyoto with no real power. Again, he got to hang out and live his life of luxury. And this Minamoto leader is going to take the title of shogun, which was given to him by the emperor. And he becomes the real leader of Japan during this period. This also begins the Kamakura shogunate period in Japanese history. And so these shoguns, these military dictators, basically create a form of centralized feudalism, similar to what we saw in Europe, with one key difference, and that's that role of the shogun. There was really no similar role in European feudalism. And so the shogun divided the countryside into fiefs, grants of land. And during this period, there were about 300 different kingdoms across Japan. And the shogun appointed these daimyo, which were kind of Japanese nobles, to oversee these different fiefs. And that's what created this Japanese feudal system. And so, much like in Europe, these daimyo, these nobles, had to protect their land. And so we needed a military class, and that's going to lead to the rise of these samurai. And so samurai were basically supported with food and other necessities so that they could devote their life to martial skills. And so they grew up practicing hunting and archery and riding and other skills that they needed to be great fighters. And they were armed. Their key weapons were really the longbow and spears, but they were also armed with swords as well. They also observed a very strict samurai code called Bushido that stressed family honor and death, and included the ritual suicide of seppuku, where it was more honorable to kill yourself than to be captured and killed by an enemy. And peasants across Japan were basically reduced to serfdom, similar to what we see in Europe. And so they worked on the land and provided food in exchange for protection. So when we look at the overall role of women in Japan, in early Japan, during that Nara and the following Heian period, women had decent status, especially your aristocratic women. Your upper class women participated in these elite rituals. They dressed in layers of silk. They powdered their faces white and had quite a bit of influence in the upper classes. There's even several examples of females serving as empresses. But with the rise of this shogunate, this feudal period, women are going to lose quite a bit of their status. And we see that often in these military societies. There's just not a strong role for women in those situations. And so women are going to lose status because of that. We're also going to see women lose status as Neo-Confucianism makes its way into Japan, and Japan's going to adopt those patriarchal aspects of Neo-Confucianism. And even Shinto, the native culture of Japan, the native religion of Japan, is going to become more patriarchal as well.